the question is, how many hours do you need to learn a language? That's a question. We have some data from this AUA language school in Thailand.
Okay.
How many hours how many hours of Thai you should have before being this or that level. But practically that's it. We don't have any other data except some personal stories. Maybe someone is tracking his own progress in a little file. And sometimes we share those experiences, those numbers with each other. They all seem to be more or less in the same, the same numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it's a bit vague.
Okay. And what?
But that's a good point. This is something that anyone who wants to learn a language naturally should consider. Is that you can have a log file. You can just write it down in any way that is convenient to you. You can write down how much time you've spent getting language input. And then see, well, this is instead of telling yourself, I've made one lesson today, or I've made 10 exercises this week. Instead of this, you can tell yourself, I've watched 3 hours of the language input this week. That's okay. Or maybe if it's 10 hours a week, that's just wonderful.
Even better.
And you will see the progress. You will feel it. You will feel the difference at some point. Maybe at 50 hours, right. You will say, "Oh, I have 50 hours of language input. Let's look back at when I had 0. What happened?" And then you will understand that you have made progress actually.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's totally agree. That's the thing with the traditional conscious approach is, like you said, you go to a language class on a given day, you work through lesson number 2, and you go home feeling that, okay, I've made this improvement today, right? Or I'm this much better than I was yesterday, right? We all know what that leads to when it comes to actually using the language and acquiring the language. But again, back to your point about how you track it, that's excellent. That's actually what I'm doing. Like, I'll give you an example in a moment. But the thing is, first of all, one thing is for me as a language learner myself, and it's pretty similar to what you said about 50 hours and noticing your progress and so on, is you can measure it the way you measure with grammar, or the traditional grammar approach, because you don't have lesson number 1, 2, etc. But like you said, if you look at the difference between, you're going to notice that once you start getting more and more comprehensible input, on day 1, you could only understand like really simple resources. And, when you've been listening to the language for 50 hours, you might be able to understand cartoons or whatever it is, right? And it's just that in my case, that really helps me a lot, because after an X amount of hours, okay, I wasn't able to understand anything at the beginning, and now I can understand things on my own, even if they're like super simple cartoons or comic books or whatever they are, right? I think that's tremendously helpful, like seeing the progress, right? But I want to ask you, you talked about those numbers. So what are they in your experience? Like, there's like the $1 million question, right? Like, how long does it take to, to learn a language, and what does it mean, or in your experience, what, I'll share mine later, but in your experience, what are those numbers, approximately?
Oh, the numbers. We all want the numbers, but I am going to upset you. There are no exact numbers for the moment. And it depends a lot on so many criterias. What's your native language? What is your target language? Plus, as I've said several times today, we all have different brains. And this difference lies not only in the field of the level of intellect of different people, but even it's not even this, but also something about our psychology. Different people put energy in different spheres of life. Like someone can study for hours every day because this is something that is natural for him. Someone can study maximum 1 hour a day, and then he just wants to put his energy into physical action, for example, like sports or something else. Someone wants to put his energy into emotional life. I don't know, maybe he's an actor and this is how he lives with his emotion. He does not want to study a lot. So we all put energy in different places. And where our attention is, this is where our energy is. So if we are able to put a lot of attention into the language, that's going to be a very different story comparing to other people. So it's very hard to measure because we are all different. We have different goals, brains, circumstances, languages, background, and so on. But if to put this aside and assume that we are all a little bit the same, then very average numbers would be, well, if we are talking about fluency, let's first give a definition to the fluency, because that's a very vague term as well. Everyone understands it in his way. So let's say that fluency in a target language, in the second language, is a state when you are able to communicate with native speakers in daily circumstances, daily situations. Nothing very, very special, nothing very, very professional. We're not talking about that. Daily situations, daily conversations, normal speech. In this case, apparently, it is something between 600 and 1,200 hours of language input.
Okay.
So 600, it's if you are learning a language that is not far from your native language. So if they are kind of in the same group of languages, apparently it takes around 600 hours. If it's from a different group, it's closer to 1,000. And if it's very, very far, a very distant group, apparently it's more than that. I would love to know those numbers. And this is kind of my inner motivation also to do this teaching and to make language content. I would really love to watch people using the method and try to figure out how it really works, how much time it takes. I am planning to make a website that would track time spent getting language input.
Hmm.
I really hope that it will work and well, and so I could have those numbers, those statistics, and if I have them, I will definitely share it with everyone.
That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I mean, like, the first point you made is really interesting about people being different, because mainly because we might be listening. I mean, we might be watching, or we might be getting input in our target language for an hour. But if one person is really paying attention, like 95% of it might be comprehensible, whereas another person might be distracted sometimes. And even though we're getting exposed to the language for an hour, both of us, this second person is really only getting half an hour of comprehensible input, to put it into simple terms, right? Mm-hmm. That's a difference.
Yeah, we all have experienced that at school, right? We're all at the same lesson. There are, I don't know, 20, 30 people in the class.
Yeah.
And for some reason, some students have heard everything, understood everything, and some of them just come out of the class with nothing. What is that? It's just because we are not robots. We're humans, and we're different.
Yeah, I know. Like, yeah. And your passion for it does make a difference. Yeah. But yeah, like back to those numbers, and I want to share my experience as well, because I've talked about it.
That would be great.
I've talked about it on my channel a couple of times, but I actually did that with Italian first. When I started learning the language, I started from scratch, all right? But again, like you said, Italian's close to my native language, Spanish. So I was actually able to understand cartoons right away, which is not going to be the case if I were to learn Japanese, for example, right? So right away, I had access to comprehensible input from simple resources like cartoons and so on. But in my experience, because I actually wrote down every single thing I did, like I listened to Peppa Pig for 10 minutes, things like that. It took me around 500 hours of comprehensible input to get to a point in which I could communicate naturally. But again, this is really far from fluency, meaning I have some Italian friends here in Krakow where I live, and around that time, I could communicate them in informal situations, like everyday life topics, right? But still, like a lot of room for improvement. Yeah, and to give you more context, now I might be like, I don't know, triple that when it comes to how much input I've gotten in Italian. And obviously I can communicate in a better way, but still there's a lot of room for improvement. So what I've noticed is from 500 to 1,000, what you said might be the plateau when it comes to being able to start communicating in the language naturally, right? But to really get to fluency, I believe it takes a long time, like way longer than we think, right? Because we live in the era of, how to learn a language in 6 months and stuff like that, right? And to really get to fluency, it does take a long time. But I mean, the good news is once you get to those 500 to 1,000, like you said, you have access to so many new resources and conversations with people, and you might be able to start understanding series. So you're going to be able to get 2-3 hours of comprehensible input a day if you want to, with activities, resources, video series that you're truly interested in.